You're a legend, Marcus. But legends belong in museums. That's what the new CEO said before walking out of the meeting room. I didn't say a word, but I remember thinking you just made the most expensive mistake of your career. My name is Marcus Thorne. I'm 47 years old. I was a senior systems architect at Halcyon Apps, a mid-sized mobile development company in Seattle. For 16 years, I lived in the back end, buried under millions of lines of code, maintaining the infrastructure most of them didn't even know existed. I wasn't flashy. I wasn't loud. I didn't post my work on Slack threads or pitch half-baked ideas in meetings just to get noticed. I built quietly, solidly. I was the guy you called when the app crashed at 3 a.m. The guy who built our flagship API Xcore back when we were still running everything on Heroku and PHP. And apparently I was also the guy they could toss out when they decided I was too legacy for their future. The day it happened, I was in the middle of rewriting a piece of recursive logic I'd been holding off on for weeks. It was a quiet Thursday morning. I had jazz in one earbud, a black coffee going cold on my desk. And then came the calendar invite. Quick sync, 11:15 a.m. Hunter CEO, Melissa HR. No agenda, no details. I knew. I've seen this playbook before. Hunter Donovan, our new CEO, 33X Stripe, raised eyebrows on Twitter, had been shaking things up since he took the chair 2 months ago. He'd fired the head of QA on day 3. Scrapped our DevOps protocols by week 2, replaced half of product with ex-college buddies from Y Combinator. So when he smiled across the glass table and called me a legend, I knew what was coming. I'd been branded not as a liability, but as an expense, a relic. Marcus, you've built so much here, but we're pivoting toward a faster, leaner structure. We need people who align with that energy. I looked at him. Then looked at Melissa. She couldn't even meet my eyes. Hunter leaned back smug in his modern suit, probably worth more than my monthly mortgage. We can get 3 junior engineers for what we pay you. Hope you understand it's nothing personal. Nothing personal. That phrase has always fascinated me. It's what people say when they don't have the guts to call it what it is. I didn't argue, I didn't beg. I stood up. I shook his hand firm, no anger. Just cold calculation, and I walked back to my desk. 37 Slack notifications. None of them mattered anymore. I packed my things in silence, a framed photo of my daughter, an old keyboard I preferred over the cheap new ones, and a notebook filled with system flowcharts no one else would understand. People watched me from the corners of their monitors, some too scared to speak, others just relieved it wasn't them this time. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't need to. What Hunter didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the Xcore API, the system they'd built their entire app ecosystem on, was licensed under my name. Not the company's, mine. 3 years ago, I saw the writing on the wall. I'd rebuilt the API from scratch in my spare time, registered it under a permissive open license, and reserved the commercial rights. I offered it back to Halcyon for internal use with terms. Legal signed off. They didn't even read the fine print. Why would they? I was just Marcus, the quiet guy in the corner who always fixed things. That afternoon I walked out of that building without bitterness, just clarity. Because while Hunter was celebrating cost efficiency, I had just received an email from Apple. Subject line inquiry regarding API integration licensing, Xcore. They thought I was just maintaining legacy code. What they didn't know was that I'd already rewritten the future in silence and signed my name at the bottom. Let's rewind 3 years. Back then, I wasn't worried about layoffs or some Gen Z CEO with a Twitter cult. I was worried about uptime, server load, and how to make our API stop buckling under growing traffic spikes. The problem wasn't the team. The problem was that we were growing faster than our foundation could hold. We needed a new structure, not a patch, not a workaround, a total rewrite. But no one wanted to fund that kind of work. Not sexy enough. Marketing wanted new features. Product wanted flashy charts and management. They wanted everything yesterday cheaper and prettier. So I did what I always did. I built it anyway. Nights, weekends, headphones, and the world out. I named it Xcore, short for Extended Core Framework. A lean, secure, auto-scaling API architecture designed to integrate across multiple microservices without redundant logic. It was elegant. It was fast. It was mine. I filed a non-exclusive open license but retained commercial rights, a move I made after watching too many devs get burned when their work was claimed by corporations that gave them pizza parties in return. I documented everything, kept version control separate, and when the time came, I offered it to Halcyon. Use it, I said. No charge, just internal rights, no distribution. They signed. Didn't even blink. For 2 years, Xcore quietly ran beneath every major feature in our app. You'd never know it unless you looked deep, real deep into the architecture. It worked so well they forgot it was even there. That's the thing about solid back-end engineering. If you do it right, no one notices. But I noticed something. As more of the new devs rolled in, they started treating the system like a black box. They didn't understand how it connected. Didn't know why certain calls were rate limited. Didn't ask what happens if you inject malformed JSON into a deep root. And I stayed quiet. Let them inherit the castle, but kept the master key. The final piece came last fall during an iOS developer conference. Apple quietly announced they were launching an experimental platform for native third-party app connectors. They were scouting lightweight, scalable API frameworks for pilot integration. I didn't think much of it until 2 months ago when I got an anonymous ping on my developer portfolio asking, "Are you the original author of Xcore?" I replied yes, and nothing happened. Until the morning after I was laid off. I was sipping black coffee at a local cafe in Capitol Hill, trying to decide if I should call my lawyer first or go for a long walk when the email came. Subject: Apple Inc. Xcore licensing inquiry. From API Integrations, apple.com. Time 10:06 a.m. They weren't just curious. They were serious. They wanted to license it for full-scale integration into a new SDK they were preparing for iOS 19. They already had test environments running. They just needed a signature. And they were willing to pay 7 figures. I closed the laptop and sat there for a while, letting the noise of the city float around me like a memory I didn't need to carry anymore. They said I was obsolete. But the code I wrote, the system I built, the API they tossed aside like dead weight, was about to become the spine of Apple's next-generation mobile infrastructure. I didn't yell, didn't call anyone, didn't post some bitter rant on LinkedIn. I just sat there and let the system speak for me. After the Apple email, I didn't reply immediately. I didn't need to. When you've been invisible for long enough, silence becomes strategy. I read the email 5 times. They weren't just interested, they had already tested Xcore inside their pre-release build. It performed better than their internal prototypes. They knew who built it. And now, they wanted to own it with my name still on it. That night, I went home and unlocked a drawer I hadn't touched in months. Inside, a printed copy of my open license agreement, notarized, time-stamped. My name. My API, my terms. Next to it, a small post-it note from my daughter, handwritten in blue marker, "Daddy makes the internet go." She was 8 when she wrote that. It was the only line of code that ever really mattered. I emailed back the next morning. "Yes, I'm the author. I retain commercial rights. Let me know how you'd like to proceed." Apple Legal responded within hours. They attached a draft agreement. Full license rights usage in iOS and macOS SDKs, optional NDA, and an offer that made my throat tighten. It wasn't about the money. It was the validation, the kind you don't ask for. The kind that shows up after everyone else has already forgotten your name. 2 days later, I got a text from Evan, one of the junior engineers at Halcyon. Hey Marcus, do you happen to have any of the old Xcore integration docs? We've been hitting stability issues since last week. No hello. No how are you? Just a request, like I was still on call. I stared at the message, then put my phone down, didn't reply. Later that week, I saw something that made me laugh for the first time in a while. Someone at Halcyon had submitted a bug fix that accidentally exposed part of the Xcore call signature on a public endpoint. Within hours, a dev blog flagged it, then a Reddit thread, then GitHub. They tried to cover it, of course, but I could recognize my code like a parent recognizes their child's handwriting. It was still mine, even if they tried to pretend it wasn't. That night, I poured myself a drink, whiskey, neat, and I wrote a single line in my notebook. If you build something good enough, eventually the world forgets your name, but it never forgets your work. The next morning, Apple called. Not emailed, called. A voice said, "Mr. Thorne, are you available to discuss terms in person? Our team is in Seattle next week." I looked at the calendar. Nothing but empty space. "Sure," I said. Calm. Even. Like I hadn't just been laid off 3 weeks ago by a company that now unknowingly depended on me to keep its systems breathing. They forgot me. They thought I'd fade, that I'd go quietly like a good soldier. But here's the truth. I never wanted revenge. Not really. I just wanted the truth to make its way to the surface. And it was already rising. I didn't sue them. Didn't show up screaming at the door. I just made one phone call, and Apple did the rest. The meeting with Apple wasn't in a boardroom. It was in a quiet, glassy co-working loft on 2nd Avenue. One product lead, one lawyer, one guy from platform architecture who looked like he hadn't slept in 3 weeks. They didn't waste time. We love the structure of Xcore. We want to make it the backbone of our lightweight SDK for native app integrations. We're offering $750 up front, with quarterly royalties for each full deployment. We'd like you to stay on as a retained consultant. I nodded slow, and then said the sentence I'd been waiting years to say. Just one thing you should know, Halcyon is still using Xcore, without a commercial license. The room went still. The lawyer adjusted his glasses. The product lead blinked. The architecture guy. He just smiled. That'll be handled. 2 days later, Halcyon's legal team received a formal letter from Apple's IP counsel. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, just a cease and desist, citing unlicensed use of proprietary framework code, referencing the original open license I'd filed, outlining damages if they continued to operate without compliance. I didn't write it, didn't even have to read it. I just got CC'd. The next morning my phone rang. Blocked number. I let it go to voicemail. 30 seconds later, another call. Then another. The 4th time I picked up. "Marcus, it's Hunter." His voice had none of the smugness from our last meeting. It was tight. Controlled. The sound of someone realizing they don't own the room anymore. "Look, there's clearly been a misunderstanding about IP. About ownership." "No misunderstanding," I said. Calm. I was slicing an apple while he talked. "You built it while you were here. That makes it incorrect. I built it before I handed it to you. I gave you internal usage rights. That contract is on file." Silence. Then the panic started creeping into his tone. "Okay, what would it take to fix this? We're talking with Apple." "I know," I said. "They're my client now." That one hit like a bullet. You could hear it in the dead air on his end of the line. That moment when someone realizes they're not the top of the food chain. Not anymore. "Marcus, this could cause serious damage to our production timeline." "That's not my problem, Hunter." Another pause. "We're willing to discuss compensation if that's what—" I cut him off. "It's not about compensation. It's about acknowledgement. You threw me out like I didn't matter. Now you realize I was the floor you were standing on." He didn't respond. Not right away. And for a moment I could almost hear his mind racing. How do we spin this? How do we cover it? How do we make it go away? He finally spoke. "What do you want?" I looked out the window. Seattle was gray that day, clouds heavy, like the sky had secrets too. I spoke slowly, clearly. I want your CTO to issue a public statement. Credit Xcore's architecture to me, Marcus Thorne. Acknowledge its origin. Then we talk about a license. He hung up without replying. I didn't mind, because 2 hours later their company blog published an engineering retrospective. Buried near the end. We'd like to thank Marcus Thorne, whose early contributions laid the foundation for our scalable API infrastructure. No bold font, no fanfare, just there. But I saw it. So did the dev community. So did Apple. They asked if I wanted to pursue damages. I said no. I didn't want revenge. I wanted them to remember. And now they would. They tried to erase me. But when the system started falling apart, they realized I'd never really left. I was still in the code. I was always in the code. 2 weeks after Apple published the licensing deal, Halcyon's backend began to hiccup. Small things at first. One of the microservices stopped returning valid tokens. Session timeouts misfired. Then the rate limiter went haywire and locked out thousands of users in real time. At first they blamed Jenkins, then the infrastructure team, then bad builds. But none of the junior devs knew what they were looking at, because none of them had written the system. They were working on top of layers they didn't understand, just hoping it held. And it did, until it didn't. See, Xcore was built to be lean, modular, and scalable. But it wasn't idiot-proof. It relied on discipline, on developers who respected architecture, on people who didn't try to inject third-party shortcuts into the core execution thread. And now that they were poking it blindly, it was biting back. I watched it unfold from the outside. I didn't gloat. Didn't screenshot the bug reports getting posted to GitHub. Didn't even respond to the frantic emails that started showing up in my inbox. Hey Marcus, super quick, do you remember why line 422 in handler chord PY references an external key file? Hey, need help understanding some of the timeout logic in Xcore? Looks like there's a built-in backoff we can't override. Marcus, please. We're crashing. I didn't respond. Because by then, I was busy. Apple had just finalized the second phase of our agreement. They were launching a new development kit in beta built around Xcore as its backbone. And they wanted me to lead the advisory team. From Obsolete to lead architect. Funny how fast the world can shift when you're not the one begging for validation. But let's be clear, I wasn't trying to hurt Halcyon. I wasn't sabotaging anything. The system worked perfectly when I built it. They were the ones who stripped away the stability layer to save a few milliseconds. Who took my warnings as old-school paranoia. Who fired the guy who knew where the fire exits were. That week, their CTO, the one who barely said a word the day I was let go, emailed me directly. Marcus, we're aware you're consulting with Apple. We'd like to request a temporary advisory contract to help stabilize our current environment. The irony was almost poetic. They fired me to cut costs. Now they wanted to pay me to fix what they broke from the outside. I didn't say no, but I didn't say yes either. I forwarded the email to my lawyer. She smiled when she saw it. You know, she said, you could ask for anything right now. Double your rate, stock options, ownership terms. I took a sip of coffee, then said, no, I'll ask for something simpler. 3 days later, Halcyon's homepage went dark for 7 hours. The logs showed a recursive call loop introduced by someone trying to optimize the service cache. If they had just asked, I would have told them not to touch that segment. But they didn't ask. Because ghosts don't get consulted. Only now, they were realizing something. The ghost in their machine had a name. And that name was Marcus Thorne. The company that called me obsolete was now asking me to come back. Not as an employee, as their only hope. The email came on a Friday. Subject line: consulting proposal, urgent. It wasn't from the CTO. It wasn't even from Hunter. It was from the board. That told me everything. They'd finally realized what I already knew. This wasn't a bug. This wasn't temporary. Their entire infrastructure was held together by code written by someone they no longer understood and had never bothered to learn from. Me. I opened the email. They wanted me to return as a consulting architect. 6-month contract, executive-level access, top of market rate, remote flexibility. There was even a paragraph titled Restoring Mutual Respect. I didn't reply right away. Instead, I opened an old terminal window on my laptop, typed a few commands, pulled up the last instance of the original Xcore version I'd personally deployed. Stable, efficient, perfect. I stared at the blinking cursor for a while, then closed it. Later that night, I sat across from my daughter in our living room. She was doing homework. I was pretending to read the news. She looked up and asked, "Daddy, do you still make the internet go?" I smiled. Not because it was cute, but because it was true. The next morning, I replied to the board's email. Happy to discuss, but not under the current terms. I attached a PDF titled What It Takes to Fix This. It wasn't a list of demands. It was a manifesto. No meetings with Hunter. I don't answer to him. He answers to me. No budget constraints. You cut me once to save money. You bled out 6 figures doing it. And no ownership games. Xcore remains mine. Always. 1 hour later, I got a reply. Understood. Let's schedule a call. Also, would you consider rejoining full-time? I laughed out loud. Because here's the truth they never saw coming. I didn't need to come back. I'd already moved forward. Apple had just greenlit Phase 3. A full integration of Xcore into their Swift SDK. My name was about to be printed on internal documentation read by thousands of engineers. And I was already fielding offers from 2 VC-backed startups who didn't call me obsolete. They called me foundational. So I replied, no, I don't rejoin companies that lie to themselves. I'll help you fix the house you burned down. But only so no one else gets caught in the flames. They accepted. That Monday, I logged into the system I once built. As a ghost. Now as the architect who never needed revenge. Only respect. Before I touched a single line of code, I asked for one thing. No money, no title. Just the truth in public. We had a kickoff call scheduled for 10 a.m. Monday. Board members. 2 execs I didn't recognize. The CTO who looked like he hadn't slept in days. Hunter was noticeably absent. Good. They opened with pleasantries. Thank you again, Marcus, for agreeing to help. We're grateful. We know things didn't end well, and we'd like to rebuild trust. Whatever you need, resources, documentation, team support, just say the word. I let them finish, then said, before we start, there's something I need. I don't want more money. I don't want my title back. I want one public statement, on your blog, on LinkedIn, on Twitter, everywhere. They paused. What kind of statement? I leaned in toward my webcam. I want you to credit me as the architect of Xcore. I want you to acknowledge the license oversight. And I want you to say it was a mistake to let me go. The room fell quiet. I could hear someone shifting uncomfortably. The CTO started to speak. That might be a bit risky from a legal. Not optional, I said. Calm, steady. You're asking me to patch the backbone of your infrastructure. To stop the bleeding. To rebuild what your team can't touch without breaking. I'm not doing that in secret. If I fix this, the world should know who built it and who broke it. More silence. Then a voice, one of the board members, older, grounded, said, He's right, we made the mess, let's own it. And that was it. 3 hours later, Halcyon posted the following to all major platforms. In 2021, Marcus Thorne designed and implemented Xcore, the foundational API framework that powers our backend today. We regret the decision to part ways with Marcus and are grateful for his return as consulting architect during this critical period. His contributions are irreplaceable. No excuses, no spin, just facts. The dev community took notice. Twitter lit up. Wait, you fired the guy who wrote Xcore. This is like Apple firing Wozniak and then asking him to fix the iPhone. Every company has a Marcus. The smart ones don't let him go. My inbox flooded. Former colleagues, strangers, recruiters. Some just said thank you. Others said I needed to see this. Because that post wasn't just about me. It was for every engineer who got left behind, overlooked, labeled obsolete, while holding the system together with duct tape and brilliance. That night I poured myself a drink and stared out the window. Seattle rained soft and steady. I wasn't angry anymore. Just certain. They could hire whoever they wanted, raise however many millions they liked. But at the center of their empire still sat my code. And now so did my name. I didn't come to watch them fail, but I couldn't stop it either. Because sometimes you can't fix a broken system without letting it fall apart first. It started 3 days into my return. A crash report came in. Critical. Session data was being overwritten, not lost. Not corrupted, overwritten. That didn't happen by accident. It meant someone somewhere had patched Xcore without understanding the structure. Like cutting wires in a plane mid-flight thinking you're just optimizing airflow. I traced it, line by line, back through the commit history. A junior dev recently hired. Pull request approved by a mid-level manager who hadn't even been at Halcyon 6 months. No documentation, no rollback protocol, just a note in the commit. Refactored stale cache loop, cleaner now. Cleaner. I stared at that one word longer than I should have. Because that loop, that stale cache, was the last defense before session data crossed environments. It was like removing a firewall because it looked redundant. It wasn't. It was holding the entire system from eating itself. The logs told the rest of the story. In 24 hours, over 18,000 active sessions had data misfiled. Users were seeing other people's data. Names, preferences, search histories. Halcyon hadn't just broken their product. They'd broken trust. I called an emergency meeting. CTO, board, legal. This isn't a bug, I said. It's a breach. And if Apple sees this, the SDK deal is over. We need to shut down the platform, reset every affected instance, and rebuild the environment from scratch. The CTO paled. That'll take us offline for days. I know, I said. But this isn't a PR problem anymore. It's a legal one. Your system is bleeding data. They resisted. Of course they did. But I wasn't asking. I pushed the kill switch I'd built into Xcore 2 years ago, not because I didn't trust people, but because I knew someday someone would try to clean something they didn't understand. The platform went offline at 2:42 p.m. By 3:00, Twitter exploded. Halcyon app down. Anyone else seeing weird account stuff? My profile changed. Shows someone else's name. Is this a breach? By 4:00, TechCrunch had published Halcyon suffers data integrity meltdown. Source says internal misconfiguration. They didn't quote me. They didn't need to. At 6:17 p.m. I got a call. Hunter. This time, he didn't pretend. No snark, no fake charm, just this. How bad is it? I took a deep breath. It's bad, but not permanent. If we act fast, restore clean backups, scrub all exposed endpoints, and audit permissions, we can survive this. He didn't argue, didn't grovel either, just said, tell me what to do. Funny how quickly power flips when the system stops responding to you. I worked through the night. Me, not the CTO, not the guy who refactored my cache loop. Me. The same obsolete engineer they'd cast out 6 months earlier. By dawn, the system was stable. Logs were clean. Data flows restored. Halcyon was still bruised, maybe permanently, but alive. Because of the same man they once ignored. I didn't ask for thanks, but I did ask for one more thing. The fires were out. The system was breathing again. But just as I was stepping away, my phone rang. And the voice on the other end. It changed everything. It was a quiet Tuesday morning. Seattle sky slate gray, just the way I liked it. The chaos had settled. Xcore was intact. Halcyon was back online, though limping. I was ready to move on. Then my phone rang. No caller ID, just Cupertino CA. I knew. Marcus. The voice was crisp, calm, older, familiar somehow. This is Daniel Kraus, Senior Platform Strategy at Apple. I sat up straighter. We've been watching the events at Halcyon closely. You handled it well. Clean, fast, professional. Thank you, I said. He paused. We have an opportunity, and I think it has your name on it. My heart didn't race. Not anymore. I'd learned to listen with my mind, not my ego. He continued. We're building a new developer layer into iOS 20. A modular framework, something lean, predictive, resilient. We want Xcore at its center. We also want you. Not as a consultant, not as a third-party licensee, as an internal lead. I stayed quiet. He filled the space. You'd oversee integration design, future branches shape the next 5 years of how third-party apps interface with iOS. Remote or hybrid. We'll handle relocation if needed. Package is generous. So is the stock. But more than that, we want your mind at the table, not in the shadows. For a moment I said nothing. Then I stood, walked to the window, watched the city I'd outgrown. Seattle had given me scars, but also steel. I thought about Halcyon, still patching their mess, still scrambling to regain trust. I'd given them stability, they taught me indifference. Apple, they were offering something else entirely. Influence. I'm listening, I said. Kraus smiled on the other end. We're flying in next week. Let's talk in person. I hung up, stared at my reflection in the glass. A year ago they called me obsolete. Now the most valuable company on the planet was asking me to architect the future. Not out of pity, not as a favor, because no one else could. The ghost was gone. Now I was the one building the house. I walked into Apple's campus with no resume in hand. I didn't need one. My code was already there, running, working, whispering my name. I landed in Cupertino on a Monday. Apple's new R&D building looked more like a cathedral than a workspace. Minimalist, clean, silent. A place where the future didn't feel discussed, it felt inevitable. A driver met me. No badge, no security delays. They knew who I was. Daniel Krause met me in the atrium. Tall, calm. The kind of man who didn't need to raise his voice to control the room. Marcus. He smiled, extending his hand. We're glad you came. I nodded. Glad you called. We walked through glass corridors, engineers on both sides focused, typing, iterating, designing systems I used to only dream about. Daniel kept it simple. We want to build something foundational. Xcore's architecture is flexible. It gives us a bridge between native performance and third-party developer chaos. But more than the system, we want the brain that created it. The judgment, the restraint. We don't need another loud genius. We need someone who knows when to say, that's enough. He led me into a small, quiet room. 2 people were already there. Head of Developer Tools, VP of SDKs. Both had read the source code. Both had questions. I answered them without ego. Not to impress, just to explain. What followed wasn't an interview. It was a conversation. A peer-level discussion about systems boundaries, long-term resilience. I told them how Halcyon broke the loop, how one junior dev collapsed 18,000 sessions because no one taught him what not to touch. They nodded. They understood. An hour later, Daniel leaned forward. You're not here to fix someone else's house. You're here to build a new one. From scratch. With your name on the plans this time. He slid a folder across the table. Offer details, compensation, equity, budget, autonomy. But the page that caught my eye, role title lead architect, core integration iOS platform. I stared at it, felt the weight of 100 late nights, of being ignored, of being replaced, of being told I was too slow, too careful, too old. Now that caution, that slowness, was a feature, not a flaw. I didn't sign it that day, not because I was unsure. Because I wanted the silence. One last pause between chapters. That night in my hotel room, I stood in front of the mirror, looked at the man who never needed applause, just room to work, and the freedom to do it right. They tried to erase me. Now the industry was handing me a pen. I didn't go back for closure. I already had that. I went back to remind myself what it looked like, the place where I almost forgot who I was. I touched down in Seattle 2 days after signing the offer. Not for Apple, not for celebration, just unfinished business. Halcyon was quiet when I entered, not dead but smaller, strained. The new receptionist didn't recognize me. That was fine. I didn't need a welcome. I still had the access badge they never revoked. Funny how even in their paranoia, they forgot the simplest things. I took the elevator to the 4th floor. Product, engineering, DevOps, the heart of it all, where I used to walk the halls with coffee and whiteboard markers ready to explain defend, rebuild. Now, just silence, monitors glowing, tired eyes behind screens. Evan, one of the few devs who'd been around long enough to remember me, looked up. He froze, then stood. "Marcus." I nodded, didn't smile. "They said you signed with Apple." "I did." "Then why are you here?" I looked around the room. To see it, one last time. I walked past my old desk. Still there, different chair. The whiteboard had been wiped clean. The markers were dry. A junior engineer, maybe 23, glanced at me. "You're the guy who wrote Xcore, right?" I nodded. He looked embarrassed. "Sorry about, the changes, the loop." I held up a hand. "It's done. Learn from it." He nodded fast. I promise." That was enough. Not revenge, not an apology. Just acknowledgement. That someone saw it now. What it meant, what it cost. Before I left, I stopped by the CTO's office. He was on a call. Saw me through the glass, held up one finger. I didn't wait. Just slid a small envelope under his door. Inside a single piece of paper. No invoice, no NDA, no threats. But next time you build something you don't understand, don't fire the only person who does. Signed, Marcus Thorne. I walked out without looking back, and it felt like nothing. Not heavy, not triumphant, just clean. Back at the hotel, I opened my laptop, checked the Apple repo. A dozen new commits from the SDK team. Each one built on top of the Xcore foundation. My foundation. This time no one could erase my name. They say revenge is sweet, but this wasn't revenge. This was evolution. I never wanted fame or applause. I just wanted the system to work and for someone to remember who built it. 3 months later, I stood in front of a room full of Apple engineers. Conference hall, minimalist, clean, exactly like the code we were writing. Behind me was a slide Xcore 2.0, a new standard for API stability. My name was on the corner. Not hidden, not footnoted. Printed, bold, permanent. I walked them through the architecture, the lessons, the philosophy behind quiet code. I told them about Halcyon, not the failure, but the pattern. What happens when short-term velocity replaces long-term vision? What breaks when engineers are treated as tools instead of architects? They listened, not just with respect, but with intent. And for the first time in my life, I felt something I never chased. Legacy, not the kind made of headlines or fortune, but the kind that lives in silent systems, in clean logs, in frameworks no one notices because they don't break. The kind of legacy that gets picked up by some kid at 2 a.m. 5 years from now, who reads my documentation and says, This was written by someone who gave a damn. At night I still code. Not because I need to, because I want to. Because I'm not obsolete. I'm not a ghost. I'm not a legend in a museum. I'm the man who stayed, built, documented, warned. And when no one listened, built it anyway. Sometimes I get emails, young devs, old devs, all saying the same thing. They told me I was too slow, too careful, too quiet. But your story reminded me, the right system outlives the loudest voice. And to all of them, I reply with the same line, they'll see. Just keep building. Don't chase applause, chase stability. Halcyon, they're still around, struggling to rebuild a trust they never deserved to lose. They issued another statement last month, quiet, formal. Acknowledge that Xcore saved their platform. Again, they still owe me nothing. Because I already took what mattered. I took back my name. I took back my code. And most of all, I took back my story. To the builders, the fixers, the ones who stay late, who rewrite silently, who document carefully, who get passed over and called outdated, this one was for you. Because in the end, it's not the loudest who shape the future. It's the ones who know when to say, "Enough!" This is where my story ends. But maybe it's where yours begins. Keep building. Quietly, brilliantly, relentlessly.